The ground trembled beneath Commander Xilera Vanar as explosions tore through the rocky battlefield of Farkas 9. Smoke and fire painted the sky in shades of destruction, while the endless chittering of the Skilith swarm filled the air like a nightmare come to life. Xilera, a proud warrior of the Zorvathian Empire, stood tall amidst the chaos, her twin plasma blades humming in her hands. Her silver-blue exo-armor, built for speed and agility, glowed under the harsh red sun. She was born for war, trained since childhood to fight without fear, without weakness. But today, the battle was slipping out of her grasp. The Scaleth, an insectoid species with razor-sharp limbs and relentless numbers, had been expected to break under the Zorvathians' might. Instead, the swarm adapted. They moved faster, struck harder, and overwhelmed their forces with sheer numbers. Xilera's soldiers fought bravely, but one by one, they fell. Her communicator crackled. "Commander Vanar, we are being overrun. The fleet is retreating." The voice cut off in a burst of static. Xilera's golden eyes widened. Retreat? That was impossible. The Zorvathians did not retreat. They conquered. They dominated. To abandon the battlefield was unthinkable. A sudden explosion sent her flying backward. She crashed into the rubble, her vision blurring. Pain lanced through her body, but she forced herself up, only to freeze in shock. Her legs were gone. From the knees down, nothing remained but burnt flesh and twisted armor. The blast had torn through her like paper. The realization hit her harder than any explosion. Without her legs, she was useless. A warrior who couldn't stand was no warrior at all. Panic clawed at her chest, but she shoved it down. She would not die afraid. She activated her communicator. "This is Commander Vanar. I am down. I need evac, now." Silence. Her heart pounded as she switched channels. "Anyone. I am still alive. I need." Then a voice. Cold. Distant. "There is no rescue." It was General Thalvorin, her superior officer. His tone was calm, as if she were already dead. "You fought well, Commander. But the battle is lost. The Empire cannot afford weakness." Weakness. Xilera clenched her teeth. They had left her. Her own people had abandoned her like she was nothing. Rage burned through her veins, hotter than any plasma blast. They would not even let her die fighting. The Scaleth closed in, their black carapaces glistening, their serrated limbs clicking eagerly. Xilera tightened her grip on her blades. If she was going to die, she would take as many of them with her as possible. She activated her plasma swords. The blue energy crackled as she dragged herself forward, slicing through the first Scaleth that lunged. Another leaped at her, and she rolled to the side, slashing upwards. The battlefield spun around her. Pain, exhaustion, betrayal. But she didn't stop. Then, a sharp hiss. Her weapons flickered, low power. Xilera panted, sweat dripping down her face. There were too many. One of the Scaleth lunged, its bladed arms raised to finish her off. A sudden gunshot rang out. The insectoid's head exploded in a burst of green fluid. Another shot followed, then another. Xilera turned her head, struggling to see through the smoke. A figure emerged from the haze, a human marine in battered combat armor. He moved like a predator, his rifle spewing precise, deadly shots. Sergeant Dax Callum. Xilera barely knew him. Just another human soldier, part of the uneasy alliance between their species. But right now, he was her only hope. Dax's helmet visor reflected the carnage around them. As he stepped closer, his rifle still raised. He glanced down at her ruined legs, then back at the encroaching Scaleth. "Hell of a day, huh?" he muttered. Then, without waiting for permission, he hoisted Xilera over his shoulder and started running. The battle wasn't over yet. Xilera was barely conscious as Sergeant Dax Callum carried her across the battlefield. His heavy boots pounded against the rocky terrain, dodging burning wreckage and the twitching bodies of the fallen. Smoke stung his lungs, and the distant chittering of the Skeleth swarm sent shivers up his spine. He tightened his grip on Silara, adjusting her weight. She was taller and more muscular than a human woman, her silver-blue armor gleaming despite the blood and dirt covering it. Even injured, she felt like she weighed a damn ton. She stirred, her golden eyes fluttering open. "Put me down," she hissed. Dax ignored her and kept moving. "Not happening, princess." "I am not a princess," she growled, trying to push against his shoulder. But she was weak. The pain had drained her strength, and the brutal reality of her missing legs was sinking in. Her people had abandoned her. She was a Zorvathian warrior with no legs, no honor, and no future. She might as well be dead. Dax, however, wasn't going to let that happen. A screeching roar echoed behind them. He turned just in time to see a Skeleth Ravager, a massive hulking brute with bladed arms, charging toward them. Damn it. Dax spun around, dropping to one knee as he swung his rifle up. "Hold on tight." Before Silara could protest, he squeezed the trigger. The Ravager's carapace was thick, but Dax knew where to aim. He fired 3 precise shots, one at the knee joint, another at the exposed neck, and the last straight into its gaping maw. The creature collapsed in a writhing heap, its dying screams echoing in the air. Silara blinked in surprise. She had fought alongside humans before, but she had never seen one move like this. Quick, brutal, efficient. "You fight well," she admitted, her voice weak. Dax gave a short, humorless laugh as he stood. "Yeah, well, it helps when you're trying not to die." The extraction point was still a mile away, and with Silara in this condition, there was no way they'd make it in time. Worse, his comms were dead, likely jammed by the Skeleth. He had one option left. Finding cover in the wreckage of a fallen dropship, Dax lowered Silara against the cold metal and pulled out his medkit. He ripped off her damaged armor plates, revealing charred, bleeding wounds where her legs had been. Silara snarled in pain, her claws digging into the ground. "You dare touch me without permission." Dax snorted. "Yeah, well, I also dared to save your life." "You're welcome." She glared at him, but there was no real fire behind it. She was exhausted, humiliated, and in agony. The painkillers he injected into her bloodstream helped, but the truth was, she needed real medical attention. If they didn't get out of here soon, infection or blood loss would kill her before the Skeleth could. As Dax secured the bandages, he glanced at her face. Despite everything, she still held herself with the rigid pride of a warrior. Even with her legs gone, she wouldn't beg for help. He respected that. "I will slow you down," Silara muttered, staring at the dark sky above them. "You should leave me." Dax exhaled sharply, sitting back on his heels. "Lady, I just fought through a damned swarm to get you out. I'm not leaving you now." Her golden eyes met his, searching. "Why?" He shrugged. "Because that's what humans do. We don't leave people behind." Silara scoffed. "I am not your people." Dax smirked. "Yeah. Well, right now, you're my problem." She should have been angry, but for the first time since she had been abandoned, she felt something else instead. Hope. Dax reloaded his rifle, then hoisted her onto his back. "Let's move." As the Skeleth roared in the distance, the Marine and the fallen warrior prepared for the fight of their lives. Dax moved through the wreckage with Silara on his back, his muscles burning with the effort. Every step sent jolts of pain through his body, but he gritted his teeth and kept going. The Skeleth were still out there, searching for survivors. If they found them now, it was over. Silara, however, was not making this easy. "Put me down, human," she growled for the 3rd time. "Not a chance, princess." "I told you, I am not a princess." She tried to struggle, but without her legs, she couldn't do much. "I will not be carried like some weakling. I am Zorvathian." "You're also half dead," Dax cut in. "So how about you stop fighting me and start figuring out how we're both gonna get out of this alive?" Silara clenched her jaw, frustration boiling inside her. This was humiliating. She was a commander, a warrior of the Zorvathian Empire, and here she was, being carried like a sack of supplies by a stubborn human. But no matter how much her pride screamed at her, she knew he was right. She had lost too much blood. The temporary bandages would only last so long. Without proper medical attention, she wouldn't make it. Even if she somehow survived, what then? She had no legs. Her own people had abandoned her. What was left for her? Dax suddenly stopped and pressed himself against a half-collapsed wall. Silara stiffened as she heard it too. Scaleth patrol. 3 of them, moving through the ruins, their sharp limbs clicking against the stone. Their black carapaces shimmered under the broken sunlight, their glowing red eyes scanning for movement. Dax carefully set Silara down behind cover. He pulled out his combat knife and sidearm, gripping them tight. "Stay put," he whispered. Silara's golden eyes narrowed. "And what exactly do you think you're going to do?" He gave her a cocky smirk. "I'm gonna take care of it." Before she could argue, he was already moving. Silent, fast, efficient. Silara watched with growing surprise. She had fought beside humans before, but most relied on heavy firepower and brute force. Dax, however, was different. He moved like a predator, slipping through the rubble with quiet precision. The first Scaleth didn't even see him coming. Dax's knife flashed, slicing through the alien's throat in one clean motion. He caught the body before it hit the ground. The second turned at the sound, but Dax was faster. One shot, right between the eyes. The third lunged at him, screeching. Dax barely had time to react. He dodged the first strike, but the creature's bladed arm slashed across his shoulder, drawing blood. Silara grabbed a fallen Scaleth weapon and fired. The blast ripped through the last enemy's chest, sending it sprawling. Dax turned, breathing hard, blood dripping down his arm. He gave her a look. "So you can shoot, huh?" Silara lifted her chin. "I may not be able to stand, but I can still fight." Dax grinned. "Good, 'cause we're not out of this yet." He ripped a piece of cloth from his gear and tied it around his bleeding shoulder. Then, without a word, he lifted Silara onto his back again. She didn't argue this time. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they moved together. One warrior without legs, and one human too stubborn to quit. The fight wasn't over. Not yet. Dax pushed forward, his breath ragged, his muscles aching. The weight of Commander Silara Vanar on his back was a constant reminder of how close they were to death. He had carried heavy gear before, but this was different. Silara wasn't just a burden. She was a fighter, a warrior who refused to break, even after losing everything. The ruined battlefield stretched before them, filled with smoking wreckage and the twisted bodies of the fallen. The once proud Zorvathian war machines lay in ruin, their sleek exoframes shattered by the relentless Scaleth swarm. Dax's mind raced. They needed extraction. Now. "Tell me there's a way to contact your people," he muttered. Silara's voice was quiet, bitter. "There is no point. They abandoned me." Dax gritted his teeth. "I don't give a damn about their orders. Someone out there still takes calls, right?" Silara hesitated, then reached for her damaged wrist communicator. She pressed a few buttons, but the screen flickered weakly. "Low-powered," she said, "and I doubt they will respond." Dax glanced at her. "Try anyway." She exhaled sharply but complied. Static buzzed through the device as she switched to an open channel. "This is Commander Vanar, Zorvathian forces. Do you copy?" Silence. Dax kept moving, scanning the area. His instincts screamed at him. They weren't alone. Silara tried again. "Any vessel, any soldier. I am wounded. The battle is lost. Requesting immediate evac." More silence. Then, a response. "Commander Vanar." The voice was faint, uncertain. Silara's heart clenched. She recognized that voice. Lieutenant Kelis Viren, one of her best officers, one of the few she trusted. "I am alive, Kalos," she said firmly. "My location is—" A sudden shriek cut her off. Dax dove behind cover as a new wave of skilleth poured into the ruins. "Son of a—" Dax yanked his rifle up and fired. Zilara grabbed a fallen enemy's plasma pistol and shot alongside him. Even from Dax's back, she fought with deadly accuracy, her golden eyes burning with fury. The skilleth swarmed, moving fast, but Dax and Zilara were faster. They tore through the creatures, dodging between broken walls and debris. But there were too many. Dax knew they wouldn't last long. His ammo was running low, his body was near its limit, and Zilara, she needed medical attention now. "Kalos," Zilara shouted into her communicator, "our position is under attack. If you will not come for me, come for him." There was a pause. Then, "Hold your position," Kalos said, his voice stronger. "We're coming." Dax didn't have time to celebrate. A skilleth brute lunged at them, its razor-sharp claws flashing. Zilara didn't hesitate. She grabbed Dax's combat knife from his belt and, with a feral snarl, drove it deep into the creature's eye socket. The skilleth collapsed, shrieking. Dax let out a breath. "Remind me never to piss you off." Zilara smirked, despite her pain. Wise choice, human. Above them, the sky roared as Zorvathian gunships appeared, their blue lights cutting through the smoke. For the first time, Zilara felt something she had lost. Hope. Maybe she wasn't abandoned after all. The roar of Zorvathian gunships echoed through the battlefield, their sleek forms cutting through the smoke-filled sky. Dax Callum tightened his grip on his rifle, keeping his eyes on the incoming ships. Relief should have hit him, but he had been in enough battles to know. A rescue was never simple. Zilara lay against a chunk of broken steel, her golden eyes locked on the approaching ships. She should have felt relief. She was going home. So why did it feel so hollow? A sharp click brought her attention back to the present. Dax had just finished reloading his rifle, his stance still tense. "You don't look happy to see your own people," he muttered. Zilara exhaled slowly. "I do not know if they came for me, or simply to collect a body." Dax glanced at her legs, or where they used to be. He could see it in her face, in the way she clenched her fists. The doubt, the fear, the uncertainty of a warrior without the means to fight. But she was still here, still alive, and still a hell of a lot stronger than she gave herself credit for. The gunships hovered overhead, their weapons trained on the battlefield as their doors slid open. A squad of Zorvathian soldiers dropped down, their heavy boots thudding against the debris. At the front was Lieutenant Kalosvarin. He was tall, his silver-blue armor pristine compared to the blood and grime covering Zilara. His sharp violet eyes flickered over her injuries, but his expression remained unreadable. "Commander," he said stiffly. Zilara lifted her chin. "Lieutenant." Kalos motioned to his squad. Two soldiers moved forward, carrying a grav stretcher. "Secure the commander for transport," Kalos ordered. Dax stepped forward, placing himself between them. "Hold on," he said. "She's not cargo. She gets a say in this." Kalos's eyes flicked to Dax, taking in the human's blood-stained armor and defiant stance. "And you are?" "The guy who carried her across a battlefield." Dax shot back. "You're welcome, by the way." The Zorvathian soldiers stiffened, clearly not used to a human speaking so bluntly to them. Kalos, however, remained calm. "We appreciate your efforts," he said, though his tone lacked warmth. "But this is Zorvathian business now." Zilara's voice cut through the tension. "Dax stays." Kalos blinked. "Commander, this human saved my life. He fought beside me when others left me to die. If you value my rank at all, you will treat him with the same respect you show me." Kalos hesitated, then gave a short nod. "Understood." Dax smirked. "Looks like you're stuck with me, princess." Zilara groaned. "Stop calling me that." With a frustrated sigh, She allowed the soldiers to lift her onto the grav stretcher. As the ship ascended, she glanced at Dax, who stood beside her, rifle still in hand. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't alone. But what awaited her back home? Would the Zorvathian Empire still have a place for her, or had she truly lost everything? One thing was certain. Dax Callum wasn't going anywhere. The inside of the Zorvathian warship was cold, sterile, and unwelcoming. As the gunship docked inside, Silera Vaynar felt an uneasy weight settle in her chest. The moment the doors slid open, her people rushed in, medics, officers, and high-ranking officials. But no one looked at her the same way. She could see it in their expressions. Pity, uncertainty, discomfort. The once mighty Commander Vaynar had returned, but without her legs, she was no longer the warrior they knew. Dax Callum walked beside the grav stretcher as they moved through the gleaming halls. He noticed the looks too. The whispered words in an alien tongue. The way some soldiers averted their eyes, as if she were already a ghost. He didn't like it. Kalos walked ahead, his posture rigid. He finally stopped in front of an armored door and turned to Silara. "The High Council wishes to speak with you." Silara's jaw tightened. "Already?" "You were presumed dead," Kalos said. "Now that you've returned, they will decide your place in the Empire." Dax scoffed. "What's to decide? She's still the same person." Kalos gave him a sharp look. The Zorvathian military does not operate on sentiment, human. Dax's hands curled into fists, but Silera placed a hand on his arm. "It's fine," she said quietly. But it wasn't. Two soldiers escorted her away, leaving Dax standing there, watching as the only person he trusted on this ship disappeared behind metal doors. Something about this didn't sit right with him. Inside the council chamber, Silera sat before a towering group of Zorvathian officials. Their long robes shimmered with deep blues and silvers, their expressions unreadable. An elder, Councillor Virex, leaned forward. "Commander Vaynar, you have been through much." Silera kept her voice steady. "Yes, Councillor. Your survival is remarkable." Virex continued, his tone carefully measured. "However, we must address the reality of your condition." Silara's fingers dug into the armrests of her chair. "My condition. You have lost your legs." The words were blunt, cold. A warrior who cannot stand cannot fight, and the Zorvathian Empire has no place for weakness. Silara felt the floor fall out from under her. "Are you dismissing me?" she asked, disbelief in her voice. Virex exhaled slowly. "We honor your past service. You may take an administrative role, or retirement." Rage burned in her chest. This was it. After everything she had sacrificed. She slammed her fist against the chair. "I am still a warrior. I can still fight." A younger counselor, Raylus, spoke. "There are no records of any Zorvathian warrior continuing service after such an injury." Silera bared her teeth. "Then I will be the first." The council exchanged glances, unconvinced. Before they could respond, the doors burst open. Dax Callum strode inside, ignoring the protests of the guards. His eyes locked onto Silara's. "You done being talked down to?" Silara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Not yet." Dax crossed his arms. "Then I'm staying." The council stared at him. Virex frowned. "Human, you have no place here." Dax smirked. Neither did she, apparently. A tense silence filled the room. Then Silara spoke, her voice steady. "I am not done fighting." And she would prove it. The council chamber was silent. Silera Vaynar sat stiffly in her chair, her golden eyes locked onto the faces of those who dared to cast her aside. The words of Councillor Virex still echoed in her head, words that told her she was no longer fit to be a warrior. Dax Callum stood beside her, arms crossed, his stance relaxed, but his eyes sharp. He didn't belong in this room, but he wasn't leaving either. Finally, Councillor Raylus spoke. "You claim you can still fight, Commander Vaynar. Prove it. Silura narrowed her eyes. How? Virex steepled his fingers. A combat trial. A warrior's test. Dax let out a short laugh. You're serious. She just got off the battlefield, and you want her to fight again. This is our way, human, Kalos said from the side of the room. Strength is proven, not assumed. Silura didn't hesitate. I accept. Dax shot her a look. You sure about this? She met his gaze. They need to see. I will not be cast aside. Virex nodded. Very well. You will face a trial opponent in the arena. If you prove yourself, your place in the Empire will be reconsidered. Silura exhaled, her heart steady. Then let's begin. The Zorgathian combat arena was a massive, circular chamber filled with glowing combat grids. Soldiers and officials gathered on the upper levels to watch, their whispers rippling through the crowd. Silura sat at the edge of the arena as Zorvathian engineers worked on attaching her new prosthetic legs. The sleek metal limbs locked into place, nerve interfaces connecting them to her body. They felt heavy, unfamiliar. Dax knelt beside her. You sure about this? Silura flexed her new legs, testing them. I have to be. He smirked. Then go show them what you can do, princess. She rolled her eyes. Call me that again, and I'll make you regret it. Dax chuckled, stepping back as Silura stood for the first time. The room fell silent. She took one step, then another. The weight of the metal limbs felt wrong, but she refused to falter. She would not show weakness. The combat doors hissed open. Her opponent stepped forward, a towering Zorvathian warrior named Sarek Volkar. His armor gleamed, his four-clawed hands gripping a massive shock staff. Silura rolled her shoulders, her confidence returning. Good. A real fight. Virex's voice echoed through the chamber. Begin. Sarek lunged. Silura dropped low, spinning away, her new legs moving with surprising speed. The unfamiliarity of the prosthetics almost threw her off balance, but she forced herself to adapt. Sarek swung his staff again. Silura ducked, then countered, slamming her fist into his side. The impact sent a shock through her arm, but Sarek grunted, stumbling back. The crowd murmured. She pressed forward, grabbing a fallen weapon, a pair of energy blades. They flickered to life in her hands. Sarek growled, attacking again, but now Silura was ready. She dodged left, then right, her new legs giving her speed she never had before. She slid under Sarek's next strike, twisted, and slammed a blade against his back. He fell to his knees. Silence. Then the crowd erupted. Dax grinned. She had won. Silura stood over Sarek, breathing hard. Then she turned to the council. Well, Virex slowly rose. You have proven your strength, Commander. Silura lifted her chin. She was still a warrior, and no one would take that from her. The moment Silura Vaynar stepped out of the combat arena, she felt the shift. The stares that once held pity and doubt were now filled with something else. Respect. She had won. Her metal legs were still unfamiliar, and every step felt like she was walking on unstable ground, but she had proven herself. The Zorvathian Empire could no longer ignore her. Dax Callum walked beside her, hands in his pockets, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. So, what now, princess? She shot him a glare. If you call me that one more time, I will personally throw you into deep space. Dax chuckled. Noted. They had barely made it through the corridor when Lieutenant Kalos Ferin appeared, his expression unreadable as always. The High Council has reached a decision, he said. Silara's golden eyes hardened. Then take me to them. Kalos gave a sharp nod and turned, leading them back to the chamber where the fate of her future would be decided. The council chamber was just as cold and imposing as before. The high-ranking officials sat in their elevated seats, watching her with calculating eyes. Councillor Virex was the first to speak. Commander Vaynar, you have proven your strength. No one can deny your skill in battle. Celara remained silent, waiting for the real decision. Varix continued. However, tradition and precedent cannot be ignored. You are not the same warrior you once were. The Zorvathian military has no records of a warrior with prosthetic limbs serving in active combat. Dax tensed beside her. You've got to be kidding me. Celara didn't flinch. She had expected this. Zorvathians feared change. Counselor Raylis leaned forward. That does not mean you are without purpose, Commander. Celara's jaw tightened. What are you offering? Virex exchanged a glance with the other council members before speaking again. We propose a new division, one where you will train and lead other wounded warriors. You will be the first of your kind, proving that even those who have lost can still fight. Celara's breath hitched. A part of her wanted to argue, to demand her place back in the front lines. But another part of her, the one that had fought on that battlefield alone, knew the truth. She wasn't the only one the Empire had left behind. She had been given a second chance, a chance to pave the way for others like her. Celara took a slow breath, then lifted her chin. I accept. Virex nodded approvingly. Then as of now, you will establish and lead the Zorvathian Vanguard Division. Dax let out a low whistle. Fancy title. Celara smirked. It is, isn't it? As she turned to leave, Kalos stepped forward. Congratulations, Commander, he said, his voice respectful. Celara met his gaze. She could see it now, the way his posture had shifted. The doubt in his eyes was gone. For the first time since she had lost her legs, her people saw her as a warrior again. As she and Dax walked through the halls, the human elbowed her playfully. So, what's next, Commander? Celara exhaled, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. Now, she glanced at him, her golden eyes blazing. Now we change the Empire. The Zorvathian Vanguard Division was born in fire and defiance. Celara Vaynar stood at the center of a vast training facility, watching as warriors, Zorvathians who had been discarded due to injury or loss, moved through drills. Some had cybernetic limbs, others had scars that told stories of survival, but they all had the same fire in their eyes. These warriors were like her, cast aside, left behind, but never broken. Dax Callum leaned against a railing beside her, arms crossed. You know what he said, glancing at the warriors below. This is a hell of a thing you're building. Celara didn't take her eyes off her soldiers. They deserve more than exile. Dax smirked. You ever stop to think about how insane this is? A few weeks ago, you were bleeding out in the dirt, and now you're leading an entire division. She finally turned to look at him. And yet you're still here. Dax shrugged. Someone's got to keep you out of trouble. A familiar voice interrupted them. Kalos Viren, the lieutenant, stood stiffly, but something about his usual cold demeanor had softened. The High Council is watching closely, he said. Many believe your vanguard will fail. Celara smirked. Then we proved them wrong. Kalos studied her for a moment before nodding. Your first mission has been assigned. She arched a brow. Already? Kalos handed her a data tablet. A Zorvathian outpost was attacked by unknown forces. Survivors report a hostile alien species, one we have not encountered before. Dax whistled. New enemies already. That didn't take long. Celara's fingers tightened around the tablet. This was it, the first true test of the Vanguard. She turned back to the warriors training below. They had all been told they were useless, weak, finished. Now they would show the galaxy exactly what they were capable of. She looked at Kalos, her golden eyes burning. Tell the High Council they will have their answers soon enough. Kalos nodded and walked away. Dax grinned. You ready for this, Commander? Celara took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her new prosthetic legs, the weight of her past, the weight of her people's expectations. Then she smirked. Always. With that, she turned and walked forward, leading her warriors into the future.